Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Explorer podcast. I'm your host, Mike Duffy, and I'm delighted today to have a guest and a good friend, Jonathan Graham. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
Jonathan, I always have great conversations. Really looking forward to this one. Just by way of introduction, Jonathan's 41. He's from Stockton, California originally, and lots of other stops, but he's in Stockton presently. What he does for a living is help people have more courage, and we're going to talk about his business around that. And what he's most excited about is that business, helping people have more courage. And he's excited about the work he's doing, the impact it's having, and growing that as a business. So that's where I'd like to jump into first is, you've got an interesting trajectory, your corporate work, and what's led you to the work you do now. So kick us off, Jonathan. Tell us about your hero's journey.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, as you mentioned, I started out in Stockton, California, ended up going to college and studying electrical computer engineering in Northern California at Chico. After that, spent a few years in an entrepreneurial capacity that did not work out and ultimately led to me working in Silicon Valley for a number of different companies and spent the last 10 plus years in Silicon Valley. Most recently, I was working at Apple, and I worked in a capacity of product management where you're working on creating and improving products. And the parallel for this is I worked on Siri, the voice assistant, worked on the App Store. Prior to that, I worked at Netflix. And so I've always had a desire of creating things and building things. And one of the things that you think about when building products is the impact that it's going to have. So the highlight of in product management is to work on high impact products, things that people are going to use and it's going to have a positive impact on their lives. And I realized that there was actually a book that I read by a guy named Clay Christensen, who was a professor at Harvard Business School. This book that was recommended to me by a friend. It's called How Will You Measure Your Life? And in this book, Clay basically determines that Clay actually went to business school with one of his classmates, was Jeff Skilling from Enron,
Hmm.
who basically ended up going to prison. So basically, he had these three questions that he would ask himself to help guide, and he was passing along to other folks. So he had went to his business school alumni reunion. So a lot of people were not happy. A lot of people had made some questionable decisions ethically as well. And this is one of those being his classmate was Jeff Skilling from Enron, who ended up going to prison. And that prompted me to think more about how I was going to measure my life. And I knew that the path that I was on was not the path that I wanted to continue down. Very simple check for anyone who's working in any capacity, particularly if you're working for someone else, is do I want my boss's job and do I want my boss's job and their life? And I've always known that there's something that I wanted to do in this world that couldn't be done in a corporate context. And I had gifts and talents and aspirations outside of that. So it was always a matter of when I was going to leave, not if. What happened is that fear played a huge role in most people's lives, and including mine. And I realized that fear is a limiting factor. So oftentimes you see people who may not be as particularly smart as you or particularly gifted in a certain area, but they are willing to take risks and they get rewarded for these things. There's a phrase that says fortune favors the bold. And oftentimes we see that the X factor isn't IQ, it's not more degrees. It really is the willingness to get out there and put yourself out there, whether it's launching a podcast, starting a business, any creative work, writing a book. There's all these fears that we have of failure, fear of judgment, fear of other people's opinions that limit people. And I set on a very intentional path, realizing I had all the knowledge I needed. I had gone to enough seminars and read enough books, but the biggest thing that was going to separate me and from my goals and the life that I wanted to have was going to be courage. So a number of different things I did to work on those, involved going to working with therapists, involved reading a number of different books and things, but ultimately I learned to do it scared. And this led to me taking actions like jumping out of a plane, skydiving. I do not like being in planes and easily get frustrated by turbulence. I ran with the bulls in Pamplona, Spain. Went scuba diving. Done stand up comedy. I've had a desire for 10 years to do, stand-up comedy. And I never did it. And I finally mustered up the courage to do it, right? Learned to do it scared. And so I realized that my life was going to continue to be limited. I was going to play a smaller, have to settle for a life smaller than what I deserved or could have if I didn't have a stronger courage muscle. So ultimately in 2024, January 2024, I ended up leaving Apple after 5 years there. I sold my place and I moved to Mexico City. And I did this because I had a regret of not studying abroad in college. I always wanted to speak another language, and I never did that. Fear of a number of different things of what kept me from never studying abroad. And there was actually a book by a woman who was a palliative nurse. So she worked with people in their last 12 weeks. It's called The Top Five Regrets of the Dying. And number one regret by far that people had, the patients that she talked to, that I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not one that others expected of me. Number three on that list is I wish I had the courage to express my feelings.
Hmm.
So, two of the top five regrets that people have are both related to a lack of courage. And so, this is a direct relationship between people having a life that they're fulfilled with and being happy versus being resentful. And so, when I made that decision to leave and move to Mexico, and I received a very similar response from friends, family, and colleagues, which was like, "Where did you get the courage to make this decision?" So it seemed very abrupt to them, but they didn't know all the work that I'd been doing for several years up to that. So I was planning to go work on something completely different. But what I realized was that I had the opportunity to productize this knowledge to help other people the same way that I had figured out some things that worked for me. So that's literally the impetus of how I started doing this work. It was not that I intended to do it whatsoever, but I view myself, and going back to the product management background, I view
Yep.
my life as a product. So a product manager is always thinking about, for this team of engineers, this designer, this data analyst, and the resources that we have, what is the optimal yield that we can get? What feature should we create? And what priority should we launch it? What is the vision that we have to make the maximum amount of impact for a customer? And so I think about my life the same way, with the gifts that I've been given, the talents, the experiences that I have. What is the impact that I can get? What's the maximum amount of impact I have? And I realized that I wasn't going to do that, right, in a job, in the job that I had. And I knew that the same way that I look at my life and my experience of having these different resources that I want to use, my experience into these things, I had the opportunity to positively impact other people's lives. So that's what led to me creating something, just testing it out, got favorable feedback, and that's what I've doubled down on. So I have a much bigger vision now of serving even more people and helping remove fear as a barrier to human potential.
I love it.
The key to life, it isn't money, it's happiness. And when you measure how happy you are, you actually become even more happy. Our friends at Gobundance, the tribe of millionaires, use a very specific tool to measure their happiness. It's called the Life Happiness Index. And you can have it too. Go over to gobundance.com/LHI and take your Life Happiness Index assessment. You'll rate yourself in multiple categories on exactly how happy you are and get a custom output for you specifically that you can use in developing whatever goals you have for your life. Gobundance is the tribe of healthy, wealthy, generous people who choose to live epic lives. And the tool Gobundance members use at the base of all of that is the Life Happiness Index. Get out there and grab life big.
Now, I'd like to dig in on fear. So, fear is a signal, it's a survival signal. And sometimes we should honor that signal, and sometimes we should not. How do we filter? How do we know when, as you put it, to do it scared, which I love, and when do we honor fear? Help me
Yeah,
with.
absolutely. Great question. And I want to take a moment to phrase, when I use the word courage, I have a very specific definition
Okay.
that I want to use. So, one of the foundational fallacies that people have around courage is that it is the absence of fear.
Mm.
So, oh, Mike is so fearless. He can just go ahead and do this. And in reality, courage is actually the willingness to take action in the face of fear. So,
Mm.
to actually feel fear and still do it. So, that's the importance of doing it scared. If you don't feel fear, it's not actually courage.
Yep.
And so we can think about this, even if we were to represent this as I'm a bit of a nerd. So if we were to represent this mathematically, courage equals fear on the numerator, excuse me, fear on the denominator, and the willingness to act on the numerator. So very simple equation. And everything I do and try and help people is increase their willingness to act and decrease fear. So to answer your question much more specifically, you are correct. Fear is a natural part of life. We all feel it. It was created as a survival mechanism for us to be aware of things that could be threatening to us surviving. Our brains are wired for survival and not for success. It's not designed to make us happy.
Right.
And to that degree,
Totally, by the way. Yes.
we by default overprice fear. So fear and risk are two different things. Risk is real and fear is the response. And so the appropriate level of fear should go with the appropriate level of risk. So a level 2 level of risk should be met with a level 2 level of fear. But what happens is we have a level 2 level of risk that gets met with a level 9 level of fear. Mm-hmm. And that's where we overprice risk, and fear ends up costing us more than it does providing us with value. So the goal is not to eliminate fear, because it's always going to be with us. But the goal is to have the understanding of what the appropriate level of fear is for that particular scenario.
How do I determine that?
This is a great question. The first step that we do in Courage Camp is help people become aware of their fears. So there's a thing we call the fear log. So it's literally being aware of whenever you have fear, take a minute and write it down. You can put it in a physical notebook. You can put it in Apple Notes, Google Notes, text it to yourself, create a voice note, doesn't matter. The point is you have a consistent place where when you feel fear, and you want to be able to acknowledge what the actual situation was. So I'm coming out of the grocery store, and I feel fear when I see this person. What the actual fear that you felt was a surface level thing that you immediately popped in your head. And third is, what is the level of intensity? So that's the first step, is being aware. And so, working in Silicon Valley, very keen into the power of data and the ability of logging information for analysis and for finding patterns. So this is what the fear log is so important for, that first step of being able to do that. So if you create a habit of being aware, most people are not self-aware in most senses, but particularly of all the things that are stopping them or how they affect them, the different emotions. So fear has two acronyms. One is false evidence appearing real. So that's often case, and this is back to math and statistics, the type 1 versus type 2 error. So a false positive versus a false negative. So once again, we go back to evolution and how we evolved. Our brains were not designed to make us be successful. They help us be survive. So the false positive means I hear rumbling in the bushes, and I'm not going to assume it's a bird. I'm going to assume it's an animal that's coming out to attack me. Mm-hmm. So that's an example of false evidence appearing real. And so once you have the fear log, then we want to interrogate our fears. So the framework that I've created to help people fact check their fears, the same way that you have political fact checkers, because politicians are known for telling a lot of untruths, fear can be the same way as well. And so you've got to really sit down the same way that we're having a podcast conversation like this. Imagine if you were to personify fear and have a conversation with it. One of the biggest fears that we have is the fear of the unknown. And Hollywood intentionally uses this against us. If you've ever watched a scary movie, some of the most popular ones, Blair Witch Project, The Shining, Final Destination, many of these movies all use a similar tactic where they don't show the monster. It's because the fear of the unknown is the greatest fear. And a scary movie isn't scary if you don't have that anticipation of that negative event, which is what fear is, right? And conversely, faith is also believing something about the future, but just in a positive sense. But when you sit down and actually think, what am I actually fearing? And you interrogate that, then you can start to see how silly some of these fears that we have are, because our brain doesn't think about all the possible scenarios that are there. We always just jump to the worst case scenario, even if it's not very likely to happen.
Absolutely. So I'm doing my fear log and I'm looking for patterns. You also mentioned personifying and have a conversation with fear, and I could see
Mhm.
how that could develop, how over time the fear log could start to tell me about how that personality or that personification of fear exists in me. Um, how long do you need to do a fear log for to start to see that emerge?
The first time that someone does it, I've found that just one time has been sufficient for some people in seeing, oh my gosh, I've never really thought and sat with my feelings, sat with the fear that I had. Um, so yeah, literally as easy as the first time that you actually go through the exercise, that you can start to understand, when I codify something, when I have to articulate it, when I write it down, I actually now see something in a way that I didn't see it before. Because fear, we have these natural fight or flight responses. And so we feel something uncomfortable, we turn from it. We're not
Mhm.
going to go sit down. Our natural response is not to sit with things that are uncomfortable. So for many people, this is the very first time that they've ever thought about their fear and actually sat down with it.
Mm. It also,
It-
I want, I want to link it to feelings as well. Which I think is really telling. You said earlier, the regrets of the dying, not being who you are and not having the courage to express your feelings. Um, and I'm going to go at this two ways. First, I did a similar exercise as a fear log that was totally transformative at one point in my life. It was about strong emotions generally, and it was fear and a number of other emotions. And I was instructed for the course of a week to write down what it was, rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, categorize it, but really interestingly, to record what the voice in my head was telling me during that episode of whatever strong emotion it was. That's what hit me hardest after a week of that exercise. Certainly, there were patterns that I was able to see, but being able to see and objectively the voice inside my head and what it was telling me was life changing. In my case, it was just this vitriol, this acid, this bile that I was drenching myself in. And it's like fish in water. I couldn't see it until I stepped back, got some distance, and was able to really work with it. But I think writing down the feelings, writing down the voice inside your head, what you're telling yourself, that can be really powerful to add texture to this story.
Absolutely.
The other thing, when I think about being who I am and expressing my feelings, gets to the topic of authenticity, which is one of my favorite topics and I think a hard topic. When you ask people how, authentic are you moving through life? Do you have the courage to be authentic? That's a really interesting question, and I think if we, take the regrets of the dying and bring those, that's a finding. How can I just be authentically me? What's been that path for you around authenticity? How authentic do you feel now? How authentic do you feel in the past? How does that work into courage, do you think?
Yeah. So this is we can spend a whole episode talking about this. But I'll try and be as concise as possible for the sake of this recording. That's an excellent question. I would say my path of authenticity, I'm still walking, and the one of the impetus for me in terms of becoming more authentic involved two different people that I worked with telling me that they didn't think I was authentic.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one guy, this is probably, I worked at this company between 2012 and 2015, so about 10 years ago this happened. And he told me that the context was we worked in a at a big data tech startup. I worked at as a sales engineer, so it would help people evaluate the product and address the more technical details there. And he told me that he said, I basically have this falsetto, this different voice that I go into when we would be in client meetings or these different things, and I wasn't aware of that. And what I realized is that he was absolutely right. But to your point, we don't have the ability to see ourselves fully, and we need other people to help point those things out. So the relationship between courage and authenticity is a very strong relationship, because it takes courage to see yourself in a different light. It takes courage to hear things that may contradict with an existing belief that you have of yourself. And to be clear, we talked about this particular definition of courage, but there's also different types of courage. Everyone's aware of the form of physical courage, for example, person having bravery, running into a burning building to save someone. But intellectual courage is one of the most important ones, particularly I think for entrepreneurs, and being willing to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth when it doesn't, align with something that previously believed that you had. The other scenario I had was from a leader that I worked with, and he told me he didn't think I was authentic. And this was a person who I thought was very authentic, and he's a mentor to this day. And that was something that helped me realize that there's still a lot more authenticity for me to explore and understand what that definition actually means. And there's a professor at Wharton, Professor Friedman, who teaches us a class on leadership called, I believe it's called Total Leadership. He has a book by the same name. And he talks about authenticity. And it's basically when what you think, what you say, and what you do align, that is what authenticity is.
Hmm.
So if I think something in my head, but I say something different to you, that is out of alignment. Those two things are out of alignment with each other. Or if I think something in my head and do something differently of what I say, do as I say, not as I do, that is not authentic. And that's where the word integrity comes from, actually. So the root word of integrity is the same as integer. So remember, I'm a math guy, nerd. Take you guys back to middle school, but an integer is a whole number, right? So it's no fractions.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 3,000, 3,001, 3,037. Those are all integer values.
Yeah.
And that's what integrity comes from, because it is a full, all the pieces of you are there. The integrity, the integral part, means that the whole is represented, no fraction. So if you're only showing a fraction of something, and there's a material difference between what you think, what you say, and what you do, that is not in alignment with being a person of integrity, and it is not authentic. And so it takes courage many times to express things that I think that may not be popular, that may potentially hurt someone's feelings, it may challenge a relationship. It takes courage to say things that may not be in alignment with the popular narrative, and then to actually act on them and do things. But that's really at the fullest level of what authenticity is by this definition.
I really like that framework, the alignment of what you say, what you think, and what you do. And that's a formulation for authenticity. I like that a lot.
And that's why we also say somebody's not authentic. These politicians are fake, because what they say and what they do are two different things. And that's when the scandal comes out. So-and-so took money, so-and-so cheated on his wife. He's giving you this image up front. And it's actually, I'll use a great analogy of Tiger Woods. I remember this. He made his money on being, a great golfer, but also this squeaky clean image that,
Right.
Nike and Buick and all these other guys cashed in on. But that was not the real Tiger Woods. And when the sex scandal came out, you know, he lost all his endorsements. No one wanted to touch him because he's not authentic, and we don't trust it. But Charles Barkley, who's also an athlete, but made his money also from being a great basketball player, but because he's known as being a guy that's authentic. When he had a sex scandal, he didn't lose his job. He just got banned for 2 weeks from TNT and came back.
Right.
And so, and this is also why you can see different endorsement deals for people who have, you know, Nike and McDonald's. They'll sign people that say all types of, you know, very racy, explicit lyrics in their music and whatnot, but they can get away with it because it's authentic to their brand. And another person would, you know, their campaign would end, or they would lose their endorsement deal because it violated how they were presented to
Let
the
me
public.
let me dig into this a bit. I'm going to ask you a leading question. Should you always be authentic?
That depends on that given person's, you know, North Star.
The reason I ask it, I mentioned I love the topic of authenticity. It's a journey for me as well. I was told in my corporate career in various ways at points that I wasn't being authentic, and it was a strategy not to be authentic because as you mentioned, what I thought was so dramatically out of alignment with what was safe that I was cobbling together an approach to navigate this incongruity between what I thought and what I needed to say and do, and people spot it in a heartbeat. It's amazing how readily people look and are able to evaluate authenticity. But I always thought it was a fantastic topic, and came up about a year ago. I was in a 12-step meeting, and I was asked at the drop of a hat to come up with a topic. And I said, how about authenticity? And I talked about how important authenticity was. And the first two guys that shared, it just blew up in my face. The first guy says, yeah, should I be authentic? Well, I was just asked by HR to undergo coaching and counseling because when I'm authentically me, I am disparaging the younger lawyers in my firm. They're quitting, they're refusing to work with me. Is that being authentic? You're saying I should be more of that? And I'm like, oh, interesting. There's almost a two-step process here. It's, one step is to evolve into the best person you can be, um, and or find the right situation where you can be yourself, and then be authentic. Being authentic when you are underdeveloped in some critical areas of your life or when you're in the wrong situation, being authentic strikes me as a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, there are consequences for all our actions. There are, you know, there's a cause and effect in anything that we do. And that's where I will refrain from telling people what they should do and say in absolute terms. I would say on the spectrum, the highest level of ascension is full authenticity. Where someone may be and the different constraints that they have and all the other different things that they have to juggle, right? Given the context, particularly in a work setting that you're talking about, corporate America is not a real place. That is not a place where authenticity is something that, no matter how much a company may say that, bring your authentic self to work, right? There are rules in corporate America, both written and unwritten, and authenticity is not one of them.
Correct.
I think that if your goal is to advance in your organization or in a corporate setting, being at best strategically authentic is what may be worth exploring. And even within that, you're looking at that on a spectrum. But
Yeah.
from a spiritual perspective, from a person who um, is able to operate in the highest levels and is willing to accept whatever consequences may be, because they are so focused on what they prize is truly self-expression to the highest degree. Nothing is off limits. Who I am is who I am. From that perspective, and the trade-off that they may make for not being authentic. I would rather be homeless and be able to be the artist that I want. And these are real people that do exist, who, when you look at them on a psychological study, right, very low agreeableness, right? I would rather be poor and be free from these other different regimes or different ways that suppress than for me to sell my soul in their eyes, to do that, to gain monetary gain or shelter or whatever social status, right? And so different people have different levels of commitment to that. Um, I'm not here to tell anybody about those things, but definitely corporate America is not a place where authenticity is that. But I think, some of the greatest artists, and philosophers of history, right? It takes a level of courage to be able to walk away from certain things, to risk certain relationships, uh, and it comes with consequences, right?
It, definitely. And yeah, I certainly found in my long corporate career that being authentic was very dangerous. Um, and trying to fit myself into that mold of surviving, satisficing myself in that culture eventually blew me up. Led to some compensatory behaviors that were very damaging. I learned too late that I needed to find an environment where I could be authentic. So it definitely resonates with me. But I also want to go back to this, what I think is the first step in the process to being authentic. Um, and the first step is to be the very best, most integrous person you can be. Being a person of substance, being a person that is developing yourself. The more you lean in that direction, the more you'll be able to show who you are, authentically with good effect. And it's so funny. I was just reading, going back through my Marcus Aurelius for a project today, and he had something that he hit me years ago, and I worked on this for years. And he said, I'll just read it. A man should think of those things only about which, if someone should suddenly ask, what do you have in your thoughts? With perfect openness, you might immediately answer this or that, so that from your words, it should be plain that everything in you is simple and benevolent. What he means by that is here's the test. I call it Marcus Aurelius's no walls and curtains exercise. At any time, I should be able to say, Jonathan, what are you thinking? And you have to tell me. And it is, no walls or curtains to hide behind. And I have leaned into that for many years to say, I need to satisfy that test. And that means I need to prune things that are malicious, things that are inconsiderate. I need in my own mind, that's the battleground, to really have this benevolence and simplicity. So, give you a case example. I'm driving down the highway, someone cuts in on me. My first thought is not simple and benevolent. It's that, and then I'll remind myself, but wait a minute, what's Marcus's test? And I'll say, but that person might be in a hurry. That person never learned to drive correctly, whatever. I'll consciously modify it. So over the years, I've really trained my mind to be as simple as and benevolent inside so that I could tell anyone at any time what I was thinking. And I thought of that when I heard, when you thought that formulation of what you say, what you think, and what you do align. When we're really making an investment internally of what we think is something that's truly of integrity, something that's truly worthy and benevolent and kind, when I'm really focusing on that, then it's much easier for me to have the courage to then say those things and do those things and be authentic. So I think to me, authenticity is a project. You can
Mhm.
be authentic in the sense of like my friend who got tasked to go to HR. And by the way, years later, he has now dramatically turned around his skill set, his leadership, is doing fabulously well with the young folks. He changed himself, and now he's being authentically him, but to good effect. So again, I think there's this really interesting two steps to this. Am I being someone that's the best person I can be? Number one, and number two, do I have the courage to, to let that shine and let that out?
Yeah, it is a path. And I think of one thing that popped in my head is Maslow's hierarchy,
Sure.
the hierarchy of needs. And so it is all these things relate and are intertwined, but basically at the highest level is self-actualization, and realizing that after a certain um, need is met, right? The basics of food and shelter and safety, right? Then you're only able to pursue those higher levels of consciousness and self-actualization. And that's where, at different points of time, we have we're different positions. People start at different places. You have to do what you have to do, where you are. But the point is that you continue to make forward progress. And over time, I think you should be trending towards being more authentic from a spiritual perspective. And yeah, the your point of your what you realize that corporate America has a cap on how authentic you can be while being successful, or even surviving, right? It all comes from that evolutionary perspective. We have a fundamental need to survive.
Yes.
And the fear of the threat to those things are what prevents us from those. Um, One thing I was just talking with someone about last week is the courage to move your ladder.
Okay.
And I was speaking of this from the perspective of wealth building, meaning you've got to play the right game of acquiring assets, creating and acquiring assets, and being in an ownership position. And if you're not playing the right game, you got to move your ladder. And what I mean by moving the ladder is that there's a quote that basically says, "There's nothing worse than getting to the top of the ladder and realizing it was leaning against the wrong wall."
Hmm.
So this is kind of going back to me saying, hey, if you don't want your boss's job or your boss's job, this is a form of cognitive dissonance to keep going on that path and keep trying to climb up that ladder if you don't want their life. And so the courage to acknowledge, hey, there's a limit on how much I can grow and how happy I can be not being authentic, not having authentic relationships. Ray Dalio actually talks about this. Meaningful work and meaningful relationships is how he defines success. And Ray Dalio ran the largest hedge fund in the world, multi-billionaire. Excellent book called Principles. But that simple line where he talked about meaningful work and meaningful relationships, I knew there was a cap on the how much meaning I was finding in the type of work, and
Yeah.
how meaningful a relationship can be if you don't have authenticity, right? And you and I are both members of Gobundance, an organization that has a pillar of authentic relationships. So to have a high quality relationship, it involves vulnerability. It involves a willingness for you to ask me at any time, what am I thinking? And me to tell you what I'm actually thinking, knowing that there might be some consequence that might potentially something I'm thinking could be an issue for our relationship, knowing that my highest and best self doesn't have to hide the parts of me or my actual true beliefs. Not every random thought that I have is me. Not all our thoughts are mine, but a belief that I genuinely hold to be true, that I have to censor that. That is suppressing my authentic self. And there's a cap on how happy I can be.
Absolutely. And so I love the Ray Dalio formation, meaningful work and meaningful relationships, and you can see that in the ancient record as well. We talked briefly about happiness and, in our green room and things that contribute to happiness. So let's say those are two things. Hard to go wrong with Ray Dalio. Just amplify in your own mind, or from your own philosophy. What are some of those other factors that contribute to happiness, either those or others? I'm just curious.
Yeah, progress towards
Oh,
a goal.
yeah.
Um, so whether it's seeing my personal records in the gym increase, whether it's making progress in a book, any number of different attributes in business, seeing the business grow, all those things are things that I associate with happiness. Um, Meaningful connection. I think that we are all inherently meant to spend time with each other. Life is best when it's shared. And whether you're going through a good time or a bad time, experience are always better shared. So having people to do life with, uh, I would say that I enjoy being in nature. I find it rejuvenating to go on hikes and be surrounded by trees and see beautiful views, and be rewarded at the end of the hike, challenging my body. Laughter, I enjoy those things. These are all things that I would say are genuinely part of my equation, if I would think of it, of what happiness would involve. I don't have a clear definition yet or a formalized equation, but I know that as I study happiness and think about being happier, that that will probably come.
Absolutely.
The
With
absence of the absence of unnecessary BS, I would say as well. So addition through subtraction, cutting out the amount of things that are unnecessarily causing you friction.
No doubt about that. Just as an aside, I was helping a friend recently, and it took me back into some corporate work. And I was on a call with like 10 corporate types from AstraZeneca, and they were so smart and so well spoken and talking about such utter bullshit. Um, and and I just smiled ruefully, saying, "Oh my gosh, you guys are all stuck in this matrix." Um, so yes, addition through subtraction for sure. Um, I'm just wondering in this constellation of happiness characteristics, is there anything that you're leaning into more than others in terms of wanting more of it in your life or developing more of it? And
Yeah, yeah. This is something that I realized, definitely the connection piece, community
yeah,
and connection. And one of the things that I realized, I'd been taking a kinetic approach to relationships, meaning exerting a lot of energy, trying
yeah,
to will things into reality with people I probably shouldn't have been, as opposed to taking a magnetic approach
okay,
to that. And I think that a lot of my energy was going towards pursuing situations with people that just weren't we weren't on the same frequency. And I think that there's three things that I look at now. So similar to a pilot having a pre, and it takes courage, by the way, to let go of a relationship that is no longer serving you, or to really interrogate, hey, I know this person from, so many years ago. They just got a legacy spot. But if I met them today, would I still be inclined to give the same level of energy and attention to the same relationship?
okay.
And whether it's family, close friends, I think that living an examined life and asking those questions is important, and understanding how closely do how conducive are these relationships towards the goals that I have, and helping me move towards me being the person that I want to be and having the life that I want to have. And so understanding that I need to make some decisions, and some of those is just deprioritization, others are letting go of completely, uh, because they didn't align with the trajectory that I'm on, and what I want to achieve.
So
So I don't become it's removing from my happiness because there's friction unnecessarily, right? So from a perspective of I mentioned, a pilot has a pre-flight checklist. I now have a pre-friend checklist, and I think about, okay. And so from even perspective of energy, I think about, number one, what is the frequency that this person is on? Similar to a radio station. And there's an incredible book by a guy called The Map of Consciousness. He's a psychiatrist
David
and
Hawkins.
DNP. David Hawkins. Yes. Thank you. He talks about the different levels of consciousness and how you can map these to frequencies and different energy levels. And just like, okay, where's this person? I think in that same book, he talks about 49% of Americans live in states of shame, fear, guilt, pride, and anger. It's like, okay, if someone's trapped here, I understand why this person is it's not able to be the friend that I need to be. And I'm sorry that they can't be the friend that I deserve them to be and that I'm showing to them, but it's futile for me to try and pull someone up to another level of consciousness. So what is this observing? What is this person's frequency at? The second, and so he maps different emotional states to different frequency levels. So love is at the highest level, and enlightenment is at the highest level, and fear and shame and guilt are at the lowest levels.
Yep.
And so one, being more intentional about what am I observing. There's an amazing quote from Dr. Julie Gerner, who I follow on Twitter and subscribe to her newsletter. She's an executive coach, and she said, if you only see the best in people, you'll often miss the truth. And what I had been thinking about, viewing very similar from a product perspective, I can see a product for where it is today, and I also have a vision for where it can go. And so even though that thinking helped me, professionally, taking that mindset into other areas of life, particularly in relationships, ended up being a liability for me, because I could see how this person and I could have an awesome friendship together and we could grow something to be amazing. But I'm seeing it for what the best case scenario is. I'm not paying attention to the actual actions. So um, that's the actual frequency that this person is on. Second is, what's the volume, what's the magnitude that this person has, that radio station turned up to. So you might also like station 97.1, and I might like session 97.1, but I want the volume at level 10 and you want it at level 3.
Yep.
And then the third is looking at the relative ratio of those. So being much more intentional about how I show up for people, not based on who I want this person to be or what I think is possible, but what they actually show me, has been really important for me, not taking that energy and putting it into places that were not fruitful. And so it's just like, hey, meet people where they are. You may want to have this relationship with this person, but they aren't in a place to have that relationship with you. And don't try and force things. Now, and that's what that whole kinetic energy is about. All that kinetic energy that I'm putting out there versus magnetic energy of focus on attracting, putting yourself in the right spaces, um, and both mentally and physically, to attract people who are on that similar vibe and want to have that type of relationship with you.
Absolutely.
So I'm much happier now that I have a framework to go by. The engineer nerd in me needs to have that as a reference point, and then I can rebalance a lot of that energy towards myself. And it's addition through subtraction. But it took courage. It took courage. You fear being a bad person. You fear losing someone. You fear not finding other people. You fear what people say about you. Oh, you think you're too good. You fear all these different things, right? But courage is the willingness to take action in the face of fear. So it is a muscle. The smallest thing you can do and grow it over time. Just many people think of courage like an attribute, like height. And you're born with it or you're not. You're born 5'10", 6'1", whatever. But in reality, courage is much more like a muscle. Even though two people might have different muscular makeups by birth and genetics, there's still things that you can do to explore the upper limits of it. And if you take those reps over time, you can grow your courage muscle. And just like a muscle, if you don't use it, you can lose it. It'll atrophy.
Absolutely. And I like the linkage of courage to relationships. Relationships, modern data, ancient data, are critically important to human happiness. We're at root, we're such social creatures, but it can take some real courage to establish a friendship, establish a relationship. And getting really tactical, one of the main recommendations I have for people when I work with them is about development of their friendships. And frequently it comes down to courage. Once you have alignment, you said, what frequency are they on? I might say, do we share values like growth? Like it would be one of the prominent ones. But then, it's like you're a ninth grader at the junior high school dance. Do I go and I ask this person to dance? Being the person that makes the phone call, suggest having the coffee, suggest the dinner, suggest the follow-up. It sounds almost comical to talk about it, but it can make the difference between the formation of a beautiful friendship and nothing. Is having the courage, once there's enough alignment, frequency, values, whatever you want to call it, to say, I'm going to lead in and I'm going to put in some of that kinetic energy to try and make this thrive. To your point, you don't push a string if it's not there, you don't push it if it's not going to work. But I do find that I need to kiss a lot of frogs in order to have, because there's an alchemy to friendships of what causes them to really adhere and thrive. So I really encourage the people I work with and myself to really have courage once the alignment looks like it's in the ballpark to lean into trying to breathe life into that relationship.
100%.
Yeah. Well, that's groovy, man. So what is next for Courage Camp and your journey around courage?
Yeah. I have become, when you teach anything, you become better at, you learn it better yourself. And
Yeah.
so even though I focus on courage from a career context, for people that want to start a business, buy a business, make a bold career transition, I have realized that there's life-changing things that have happened to me from and changing my relationship with fear and risk and opportunity and becoming more courageous. And so I want to lean into this. I mentioned that uh, Clay Christensen had the book "How Will You Measure Your Life." I view my life as a product. My three criteria: number one, I want to pursue my potential. So this is in every dimension, whether it's spiritual work, me going to higher levels, uh, whether it's me learning another language, getting outside my comfort zone, me using different gifts. I don't want to die and leave this planet with the guilt or any sense of regret that I did not attempt to pursue my potential. And I've always used that as my reference point. I'm not comparing myself to other people. I'm comparing myself to what I think that I'm capable of. I know that I'm able to. So that's number one. Um, and that will manifest in other ways as well. My potential to be a father, to be a husband, to leave a legacy, to build a great family. But in every dimension, I want to uh, pursue my potential. And I know that I'll never be able to truly hit it, but it's fun to chase it. Um, the second is my intention of positively impacting as many lives as possible. So there's a phrase that says you're best positioned to serve the person that you once were. Uh, Another phrase that I love is find your uniqueness and exploit it in the service to others. And so the more value that I give to the world, I'm able to capture a piece of that. But especially in the age of AI, uh, there's only one Jonathan Graham. And the more that you lean in, and it takes courage to lean into your story. There was a time where I would be embarrassed to tell you I was from Stockton, California. But that's who my story. Stockton, famous for being the largest city in America to go bankrupt. Prior to Detroit taking the title after that, the number one for foreclosures, had a very high crime rate. But I'm authentic and I'm okay with saying that, right? Where before I used to fear a certain judgment that people have because you're from a certain place.
Yep.
So it takes courage in doing that, and I realize that the value that I can have in helping other people live their highest and best selves as well. And the third is I want to have fun doing number one and number two. So this relates to us grabbing life big and being happy. Um, I have made enough trade-offs in life for money. I'm never doing things solely for money anymore. Blessed to be in a position where I don't have to have many of those same pressures that I did for many, many years. And now I can explore operating at, what it means to grab life big and to really focus on the intersection of pursuing my potential and positively impacting people's lives. So Courage Camp currently is just a 5 to 8 week boot camp. but I have a much bigger vision. I'm going through a rebrand. I'm going to create a newsletter, Daily Courage, probably similar to how you might think about Daily Stoic. Um, I see books, I see in-person events, uh, and a whole vision on a platform for courage, if you will. So any and everyone who also is doing work to help people uh, challenge themselves and face fears, want to collaborate with, not compete with, uh, and really create a movement to allow people to tap into human potential and remove fear as a barrier for that. Uh, there's a old public speaker named Les Brown, an author, who talked about the graveyard being the richest place in the world. And it's where all the ideas and inventions and patents went to go. And so if I can use my part to leave, put a ding in the universe to encourage someone to press publish, press submit on that thing that they've been holding back on, create that song, have that conversation, start that business, uh, whatever that may be, if I can do my part to help begin creating that domino of how they view risk, fear, and opportunity, and to walk towards their highest and best self. That is work I'm very proud to do, and I'm only getting started. And that's how I think about my North Star.
I love it, my friend. Um, I wish you Godspeed. You've got a service mission, which are to me, the most rewarding and longest term missions, and the opportunity to help a lot of people. So it's been a pleasure having you aboard, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mike. Truly a pleasure. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Always enjoy speaking with you. You're very thoughtful, intentional, and a person that it's not common to meet a person with your level of intellectual curiosity and warmth.
Thank you, buddy. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. All right. Well, we have some follow-ups from this, from the green room and from this conversation, my friend. So, but thanks again for today, and take care of yourself.
pleasure.